Hey everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, coming at you with the video today discussing what to expect from the Set 2 meta that we're about to start in on. But before we get started, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button down in the bottom corner. I do appreciate it. I do put out regular content about the hobbies that I love the most. Now, we have got a brand new meta getting ready to start up, and we've got a lot of big cards that are going to make up a huge part of the new meta, shake some things up, and then make some things that we were already kind of familiar with even more powerful. In this video, I am going to be talking about what I think the 5 most popular decks will be right out of the gates. Now this isn't to say that these will be the best decks overall, but these are the ones that you can expect to see while people are brewing and getting ready for the next chapter's meta. These kind of videos are particularly important when product is extremely scarce like it is right now, because if you don't know what you're going to be expecting, it makes it very hard to build the deck you want to play if you're not sure how it's going to perform against what you can expect to see. And I don't know about you, but I know for myself personally, I can't afford to build a lot of decks right now because I've not been able to get a ton of product. So hopefully this video can help narrow down some of the decision making for you. Now to start things off, this is a deck that you have been familiar with already, and that is the Amber Steel Song list from Set 1. This deck was widely considered one of the best, if not the best deck from the Set 1 meta, and with the addition of Set 2, this deck is only going to get better. Most notable additions to this deck are going to be the Cinderella line. The 1-drop Cinderella having Sing 3 is surprisingly versatile in the Set 2 meta. The Steel Song list picked up a number of songs that can be sung at 3, most of which are removal spells, which makes her a particularly disruptive 1-drop for your opponents. Already noticing a lot of people switching away from the traditional 2/2s for 1s and opting for the 1/3s for 1s in order to kind of protect themselves from the early damage from the songs that she can sing. Now the 2-drop isn't really a new addition. It replaces the Simba from the original list, but it acts as our 5 through 8 copy of targets to shift up into the big Cinderella. Now this Cinderella is probably going to be replacing Stitch in most of the lists that have it. She comes in on turn 5, so a full 2 turns earlier than Stitch if she's shifted. She's not shifted, she still hits play the same turn. Now, while she does have a lower willpower, that resist 2 does make her harder to deal with from direct challenges. And the 3 lore generation is nothing to scoff at either. She also provides another form of control in the fact that if a song is played during your turn, she can then challenge readied characters, which is a tremendous boon for a lot of the more combo-esque decks that we're going to see here. Suffice it to say, this deck was a very good catch-all in Set 1 with lots of big threats and lots of kind of board sweeping and mid-range removal. Now with the addition of bigger late game threats and earlier removal, I think this deck is set to be a real powerhouse and a favorite for a lot of people out of the gates. Now, much like this deck, the next deck on our list is also no stranger to meta dominance. The Ruby Amethyst control list that we saw in Set 1 early on was widely viewed as the best deck in the format, kind of taking the second position to the Steel Song in the later part of the format. The biggest weakness of this deck was the early game. It really had to play bad cards in its deck to make it to the late game where the deck really dominated. Add this to the fact that all those early game control cards were also their ink cards to get to the late game. If they were forced to really put a lot of pressure onto the board early on, it could affect their ability to get to their late game. Well, all that's a thing of the past with the early game packages that Ruby Amethyst now has access to, mostly in part due to the Merlin and Mim packages that we see now. It allows them to play cards early on to help slow your opponent's board down, and then either bounce those cards back to your hand for extra value or just to ink them to help get to your late game. Additions of cards like Lady Tremaine also help deal with problematic creatures with Ward that the deck sometimes struggled with in the past. Being able to finish the board off with a Be Prepared and then have a later Tremaine up if they've dropped their Cusco behind it is a huge addition to the Ruby Amethyst control lists. In addition to those packages, the new super rare Arthur is no joke. Having effects come into play like your Maleficent or your Merlin packages, and then being able to bounce and return those and cycle them to get more and more draw cards or more and more triggered effects off of his abilities is a tremendous amount of help. Now the deck still runs a lot of uninkables, but they have about tripled their draw capabilities with this new deck. So gone are the days of running slower cards like Magic Mirror or the Queen. They have a lot of synergy with cards that are coming into play, and they can just abuse that ability over and over again. And I look for this deck to be at the top of the competitive charts coming out of the gates for set 2. Now, a deck that came right out of the gates early on in set 1 was the Amber Emerald aggro list. This was a deck that really just put as much lore generation onto the board as possible and hoped to get to 20 before their opponents could do anything about it. The deck was very consistent all the way through the end, even though it fell off towards popularity towards the end of the Steel Song meta, as Steel had a very favorable matchup against it. However, coming into the new meta, they have kind of a discard aggro hybrid that they can play now, with cards like Prince John and Daisy really adding to the discard supplement, and a slew of new evasive characters to make it harder for your opponent to challenge them and remove them from the board. This deck has a ton of synergy in it, can still pressure getting to 20 very quickly, but can also just completely take your opponent's hand away from them early on in the game if things go well for you. Now, whether this deck survives through the whole meta like its predecessor before it, I'm not sure, but I do know a lot of people are excited about the synergy of this color combination, and I know for sure this is a deck that's going to be getting tested a lot locally and probably at the tournament scene. Now, next up on our list is a deck that existed in set 1, but truth be told, it was pretty bad, and that is going to be the Ruby Sapphire items list. Now, Sapphire has gotten a huge boost to their item repertoire. With the addition of Popsicle, Nick, and Judy Hopps, this deck really has a ton of synergy and a ton of card drawing power. Add to cards like Flavisham, who act like a reoccurring Judy Hopps, and you have a really, really good draw engine in what before was kind of a lackluster deck that had to play a lot of bad items really just to go off in any fashion. Now, the win conditions for these decks still varies from time to time. I have seen some lists that are opting for Tamatoa. I've seen other lists that are just opting for value characters to really just keep cycling, drawing, questing, and putting enough onto the board that their opponent really just can't deal with it. But either way you look at it, I think Sapphire has gotten a big boost this particular set. Whether or not the items list stay the primary Sapphire focus, or if the item engine that is provided by Popsicle and the Zootopia characters really just emerges as the kind of draw engine for Sapphire is yet to be seen. But this is definitely a deck that you're going to be seeing out of the gates in Chapter 2. And last but not least is the definitive aggro deck for this set. Now, early on in set 1 meta, I had tested an Amber Amethyst aggro deck, and the deck was a very, very high roll, fun deck to play, but absolutely lost to a lot of the steel decks that were in the meta at that point in time. With the addition of set 2 and the bounce engines and the ability to protect your 2 lore 1-drops and your 3 lore 2-drops that we have now with Pinocchio, the deck really has a much faster clock with much more survivability. And much like any other card game, when a new format evolves, the fastest aggro deck that is out there always seems to kind of climb to the top early on in the list. Now, this thing can pressure wins as early as turn 4, but consistently can pressure wins by turn 5 and 6, which is a very fast clock for any deck that doesn't have a good jump on the game to go. If you can't get their board disrupted early enough, sometimes it's just too late to do anything by the time your deck really starts to kick it in gear. And because of that, I think a lot of players are going to be looking to capitalize on this kind of evolving meta with a deck that is just very streamlined and very aggressive to its race towards 20 lore. So there you guys have it. That is my top 5 deck list on what to expect with the new Rise of the Floodborn meta. Make sure you guys let me know what you guys are seeing down at your... Make sure you guys let me know what you guys are seeing down in the comment section below, and be on the lookout for some more in-depth breakdowns of these individual decks coming up in the weeks to follow. Until next time though guys, Hobby Hero